Hi, I'm William Shekel from the Chambers Rescue Channel, and today I want to talk to you about how to identify and set up the Chambers Model A. The Chambers Model A was sold between 1936 and 1938. It was the first time that Chambers streamlined its residential offerings. Even just a year earlier, they were trying to offer 10, 12 different models. 10 years before that, they were boasting 24 different residential stoves for every household need. And it doesn't take a lot to imagine that with maybe overextending themselves in 1935 and the toll of the Great Depression that was certainly hitting all of America very hard in 1936, it was time to simplify the manufacturing process and make it less expensive. One stove fits all homes, and that was your Model A. And Model A is what we called it retroactively, that didn't have a name at the time. In 1935, every single Chambers stove had a nickname, whether it was the Hambaker or the Vogue. And the Vogue is actually an interesting stove because it's what a lot of people call an early A. And I want to disambiguate those two stoves because if you're working on them, they're very different. There's things that just aren't there on the Vogue that are there on the Model A. They are distinct models, which is why they have distinct model numbers and also distinct names. The Vogue, the Model 7141, is not an A, even though it looks a lot like it. So I want to show you how to make sure that your Model A is actually a Model A, not a Vogue, not a B, and certainly not a C, and what makes an A, and then how to set it up and use one. The first dead giveaway that this is a Model A and not a B or anything later is this split front panel. This line down here indicates that this is one piece of metal, this is a different piece of metal. They screw in completely separately. If I took the screws out of this, I could just pop this off and you'd have half a front of a stove. The Model B and C have one solid front panel. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You've got a split front panel. You don't have a B or a C. You probably have an A. One of the things that's immediately noticeable that sets an A apart from a B or a C are the thumb latches. This is chrome with enamel, and the enamel was either green, red, white, or in one instance it's known to be original, black. Normally they were chosen to complement or match the color of the stove itself. The green, in my experience, has always gone with the ivory. Red always went with white. There are some white models with a chrome top, which was scarce at the time, that have white enamel instead of red or green. And there's one known example of the Chambers Model A, which is believed to be original black. Whether it was a prototype, an experiment, a custom order, we don't know. Pictures are out there, and I've been promised I'll see the stove someday, so if I ever get to see it, I'll let you know. But it had black enamel, but the most common one is certainly red, then white, then green. Now, the Vogue has those same thumb latches, but what no other model has are these stamped steel Art Deco legs. These I've seen in black enamel and chrome, and I mean, just looks so cool. Nothing else has it. If you don't have these legs and everything else matches, you've got a Vogue. You don't have a Model A. Model A came with these exclusively, and after 1938, I've seen them on one or two Model Bs ever. And I think that was only because they were custom order and the factory still had them in a box somewhere. But if you've got those legs and you've got everything else, you've got an A. If you have everything else and you don't have those legs, you've got a Vogue. Another detail that was unique to the A was actually this burner grate right here. On the Model B, it only had 4 tines. This has 8. So we still have the other 2, the simmer ring all the way in the back. This diffuses and retains heat, so it's good for a low simmer and keep your spaghetti sauce going in the back nice and low. This one with the triangular inset was for smaller pots so that they would remain well balanced. And then this was the so-called speed burner because it didn't interfere with the flame. The Model A's thermowell from from a performance and design point of view, is entirely the same as the Model B. It's different from the Model C, but then everything is different from the Model C. You see the pilot right down there. Burner still slides right in to the jet and then rests in those two brackets. You see the sealant that I put at the bottom of the thermal well. That's a restoration technique that I use as a preservative. It's oven safe. But that's really because one of the things that they greatly improved on over the course of the B and the C with the thermal well is how it was manufactured. And later there was no seam down at the bottom that caught rust like on the A's. So when you restore an A, you want to put some sealant. You need to get the right stuff to make sure it's oven safe and will withstand the heat. But I don't want to get into a restoration conversation. I want to show you how to set this up. So obviously, when I show you how to light the pilot later, you're going to be sticking your lighter right down there by that burner, and then putting the grate right back on top. So just a quick recap on the things that make an A, the thumb latches, the split front panel, the legs, and the burner grates are the things that are unique to an A on the outside. You can walk up to a stove and know right away what it is. There'll be a quiz later, I'm sure. One of the other things that's very different between the Model A and the Vogue is you notice the A has the controls for the broiler right here in front. This lifts the broiler all the way up. This is the sizzle platter lifter, and it has 3 different settings. On the B and the C, you just turn a handle and you can stop it wherever you want. On the A, you have 3 different settings for all the way away, middle, and close to the flame. And I'll show you that in just a second. But on the Vogue, instead of having these 2 handles in the front, you'll actually have 2 levers on the side. So you'll have a kind of a crank in the back to lift up the broiler, and another lever in the front that's the sizzle platter lifter. In some models, they actually put a dial here. So they still have the crank on the left, but they'll put a dial here so that you can turn, instead of lift, how high the sizzle platter is. But those are both Vogues, not the Model A. The Model A moved both to the front of the stove. So if you see both in front of the stove, you'll see an A on the serial number tag on the thermal well. So let me show you how the sizzle platter lifter works. You can hear it. 1, 2, 3. And you don't have to use the thumb lash to get it up. But you do to get it back down. And you're going to hear that crash. But I do that kind of intentionally when I demonstrate it to push it all the way down, so you hear that move. There's no question, because you can kind of see I'm trying to keep this kind of over to the side a little, trying to show you how you can see it, but you really can really hear it. If you look right in that, you can't really get it on camera, but if you look in that gap, you can see it move closely. And that's actually an important asset for broiling. It's a long story that, again, I promised to get into some other day, but not today. And of course, when all else fails, you can always look at the serial number plate if it's legible. Underneath that screw, you see stamped into the serial number plate 11A-7. So there's your Model A, and now we know for sure. If it were a Vogue, it would say 7141 down there. This says A, we've got a Model A. Which brings us to the next few differences I want to show you, and they're inside the stove. First, get a load of this burner. That's an early Model A burner. It's the same that was used on the Vogue. Later in the production run of the A, they switched burners. They changed the design to this. And if you've watched my Model B videos or own a Model B, you'll recognize this right away. They use this burner from late 1936 through really 1948 with the BZ. It's important to know, though, that these are not compatible with each other. You notice this rests right on that bar in here. So you have to slip the burner onto the orifice cap and then rest it in the burner so that rest the burner on the bracket so that those 2 fins are in the middle of the burner. This has these little supports on either side of it. They rest on brackets that are inside the top. So the tops on Model A's are also not compatible between early and late Model A's. They are completely different beasts. They have different holes in them. They screw into the chassis differently. They have different supports and different mounts for different supports on the inside, different pilot constructions, and so on. It was a work in progress. They made a lot of changes quickly, but at the start, they had this asymmetrical burner style, and they also had unique flash tubes. So let me show you that. So this is an original Model A flash tube. It is flat on one side as opposed to round for all the other ones. It still has two parts. Comes apart so you can adjust the length of the flash tube. And this is kind of a guide to prevent extra airflow hitting and hitting the connection between flame and gas. So when you position this into the burner, you slide this all the way up so it rests against the edge of the burner so that there's no draft that can affect that connection. Aside from the fact that they improved upon this over the decades, these are irreplaceable. If they break, you're not going to find a new one anywhere. No one makes them. What they do make, however, are the flash tubes that were prevalent in the Model B and C, which are these. So what you can do if you really need a new flash tube for your Model A, you can get one of these. They sell them on eBay. And get a piece of steel tubing that fits it. Just slide right in. I think this is 9/16 on inner diameter and 5/8 outer diameter. Then, of course, you need to drill a hole in the bottom because the way the flash tubes fit. So let me show you this because it's really hard to show you inside the stove. This is a Model A pilot. It sits right underneath here, right in the center of the stove, and it screws right into an adjustment screw so you can change the height of the pilot. I'll talk more about that in a second. But the flash tube just rests right on these spindles here. It just snaps right in. And then, you can get the angle right and you can adjust the length. So if you want a modern solution, you have to make sure you drill the hole that will fit the spindle. Get that right in there. And then you adjust it so that it's facing the right direction, pointing where you need it to, and it's the right length. So I took out the front left burner to show you these two adjustment screws. The back one in this case is for the standing pilot for the stovetop, and this one is for the standing pilot in the thermal well that I showed you earlier. So you're going to take a flathead screwdriver and take off the thermal well lid, take out the burner grate and the burner, and light the pilot and ever so slightly turn that screw until it's about 3/8 to 1/2 inch high. Don't want higher than 1/2 inch. And like I've shown you in other videos, take a 1/2 inch wrench and put it up against the flame. If they're the same height, you're fine. If they're not the same height, adjust a little. For the pilot, it's the same thing, but it may not look exactly like this. And part of the reason is because Chambers kept changing things. And the other part of the reason is because you don't know and can't possibly know the entire service history of a 90-year-old stove. You never know when somebody might have come in and said, I've got something that'll do the job better. And if a stove has been in use, even single family use, I see jury-rigged solutions or parts for a Model C in a Model A, and like you can't really explain it. It just kind of happened at some point in the history, which is why if you're smart about this, you do two things. One, you never say always, and you never say all of them because you're probably going to end up being wrong. And the other thing is you kind of have to go with the flow and adapt. Like if you see one of these instead of that screw or that adjustment I just showed you, or one of these, which we'll see again in just a second, these are also adjustment screws for pilots for Model A's. These came out of other Model A stoves. And what you do here is you loosen this screw to make the pilot flame bigger, or you tighten the screw to make it smaller. And then at the end, you hold the screw tight with a screwdriver and turn that nut so that the pilot can't move or rattle or bump or fluctuate at all. And the same thing here. This is a screw and this is that same nut. You just turn it with your fingers. And you may even see one of these. This is a new version of an old thing that's still in use. And one end screws into the manifold, the other end screws into your pilot. And you might have a configuration just like this. All of these are original. All of these are possible. And it's also possible that in the factory that day, whoever was working on the production line put the thermal well pilot in the back and the stovetop pilot in the front. That's less likely, but it can happen. My point is, observe the line that you're looking for. If you look carefully inside, and let me get my screwdriver to point, you can see this gas line in here. See that right back there, snaking out and going up to the stovetop pilot. Here we see it snaking down towards the thermal well, so we can follow the line and figure out which one is which. So now let me show you the pilot for the Model A, because it's, again, we looked at it briefly before, but this is a completely different animal from every other pilot that Chambers ever used. This is the Shorelight. Shorelight was a very adjustable pilot. So you had the set screw that would control the height. And if you see this little, it's hard to show you on camera because it's by design tight, but it turns and you can open it all the way to let more air in, or you can close it to let less air in. And you adjust it just like every other flame. If you have too much yellow in your flame, you do not have enough oxygen. You need to open up the air shutter. If you have blue flames floating away, you have too much air. You need to close the air shutter. Pilots are notoriously inefficient. They always burn with a slightly yellow tip. And this is no exception, but you can improve its efficiency by dialing that air shutter. On a restored stove, obviously, this is much easier than on an unrestored stove. I've never seen one of these that isn't seized into place on an unrestored stove. But if you've taken care of the restoration and you've refurbished this and made sure this can turn, once you light that and set it to the right height, again 3/8 to 1/2 inch, then you can adjust this. You have to reach in underneath, and can't show you that on camera. You just see my arms and then hear some grunting, but you would eventually get a perfectly blue flame, or almost perfectly blue, ever so slightly yellow tip on the tip of your pilot. Okay, because this is a how to set up video, I want to show you the back. Notice that this 3/4 inch male pipe is the end of the manifold. This is where you make your connection. So you're going to probably want to put a black pipe elbow down. You'll notice as I've shown you different things in the video, you may see little specks of blue. This is sealant. Always make sure you are using a gas-rated sealant. If you ever see anyone approach a gas appliance with that white plumber's Teflon tape, don't ever let them near a gas appliance again in their lives, because they may all end up being rather short. Always use properly gas-rated sealant. That's either the yellow tape, or I use gas oil thread sealant. It's blue, it's thick, it makes things go on well. You get a Loctite. Takes a little bit extra effort to clean up. Sometimes it can get something inadvertently pale blue. There are worse things. I'd rather be safe than have an unsealed connection or have an improperly sealed connection. The other reason I want to show you the back is because while Chambers said the Model A needs 6-inch clearance in the back, it really needs 3 inches, and I want to show you why. It's not because of the pipe. It's actually because of the thermal well. When you open up the thermal well, this vent opens and it extends 3 inches past the deepest part of the stove. That also helps ensure that when you lift up the cover, see how it pivots out towards the camera here? That makes sure that it has enough room to fully open and rest. If you're any closer than 3 inches, you're going to run into problems with your thermal well vent, and you don't want that. The vent for the oven and the broiler are right over here, so giving it a little extra space doesn't hurt, but 3 inches, 3.5 if you want to be really generous, is more than enough. While we're back here, I want to point something out, because it's easiest to measure a stove from point to point in the back because you don't have any curves. The original manufacturer's data for the Model A says that it is 37.25 inches wide. I don't know what kind of measuring tape they were using, but they're wrong. This is 37.5 inches. From this point to the other point of the stovetop at the furthest point, or from the furthest point out from the leg to the other furthest point out from the leg, 37.5 inches, absolutely no question. That's the space you need between your cabinets if you're going to put this in between cabinets. I don't know where they got 37.25 from, but almost 90 years later, it's time to correct them. 37.5 inches, the exact same as the Model B, and that is true whether it's an early 1936 Model A or a 1938 Model A. They were consistent in the width, and they were consistently wrong in their documentation of it. So I want to show you two last things about the Model A. First, it has a pantry like the B and the C. Some Vogues do, some Vogues do not. But I want to show you underneath the pantry shelf, there's nothing but floor. And this isn't really important for people who will, like me, who will drive themselves nuts trying to get a perfect flame on a stovetop burner. And no matter what you do, you get too much air. Well, people talk about drafts in old stoves all the time, and most of the time they aren't really right. But on a Model A, you're absolutely right. If you don't have the pantry shelf in place when you're adjusting the stovetop burners, you're going to have a bad time. You need to make sure that's in there because it does actually block airflow from giving you an updraft and providing too much oxygen to the ignition on the burner. That means you're going to get blue flames floating away no matter what you set the air shutter to, and you're never going to get the right flame. And then you're going to get a completely different performance once you put the pantry shelf line back in. That's why for every subsequent model, they added in a floor. But on the Model A, you've got no floor. Okay, one last thing to show you. Even though we're not looking in the pantry, that pilot that you see through that service window is controlled inside the pantry. Now, everybody always asks, what's that little thing underneath the oven door? That is a mica window so that you can see your flames be at the proper height while the oven is operating, while it's closed. And the pilot is what you see right in the front. And I'm going to set a picture in here so you can see that the thermostat has attached to one of the fittings another one of those little set screws that I showed you for pilot height adjustment. It's the same exact thing. You've got to loosen that screw to increase the height, tighten the screw to decrease the height, then hold the screw steady with your screwdriver and tighten the nut so that once you have it to the correct 3/4 inch height, you don't disrupt it down the line. It doesn't wobble. It doesn't leak. It's nice and secure at 3/4 inch. That's a mistake a lot of people make. These stoves are different. They did evolve. Things did become more efficient. And the Model A, while certainly nothing to throw a stick at and certainly more efficient than pretty much anything you're going to buy new today, that flame height is one of the things that was improved upon so that we could have a lower, 3/8 of an inch is half as much fuel as a 3/4 inch flame. So they improved that, but for this model, we're at 3/4 inch, and we set that inside the pantry. I have enough other videos about how to adjust the orifice caps and how to know what kind of orifice cap you have and what these air shutters are like and how you adjust them. I don't want to make this any longer than I need to because that information is already out there. But I think that little idiosyncratic things about the A like this are important to know and understand so that you are using your stove and it performs optimally for you. The A came with black enamel or a chrome top. Chrome was relatively scarce at the time. Chrome just started going on stoves in 1934. Before that, it was nickel when you see anything shiny. 34, we start seeing chrome on stoves. This was 36. So it wasn't as common as the black enamel top. That was a far more popular choice. they all had the covers that fold down. These are held on by springs. And some had the option for backsplashes. There was a backsplash with a timer in it. That was the deluxe backsplash. And then there was the super deluxe backsplash that had not only the timer, but salt and pepper shakers and a chrome light hood. So that's the Model A. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the Chambers Rescue Channel.